I want to talk a little bit about how the VA addresses mental health claims in general. Let's talk about mental health conditions. It's probably one of the only conditions in the entire VA, and you're rated based on degree of social and occupational impairment, with 100% being total social and occupational impairment. Now, ironically, you can actually be 70%, which is not totally socially and occupationally impaired, but still qualify for total disability based on individual unemployability. I talk about TDIU in other videos, so I'm not going to get into it here. But what I want to talk about, though, is the mental health framework the VA uses. It doesn't really matter what your mental health condition is. If it's depression, major depressive disorder, anxiety, insomnia, bipolar disorder, PTSD, the VA is going to use that same framework of total social and occupational impairment. If you have a diagnosis of depression and PTSD, the VA is not going to actually rate you for both because the rating framework overlaps so much. You only wind up getting rated for one. So lots of veterans have a lot of coexisting mental health conditions. PTSD that might manifest as depression one day and anxiety the next. And if you speak to enough counselors, they might say, well, you have an adjustment disorder, or they might say you have depression, or they might say you have PTSD, just depending. It winds up getting kind of confusing because a veteran might think, well, I know I have PTSD because that's what I was diagnosed with in service, but the VA isn't granting me service connection for PTSD. They're only granting me for depression. If you have PTSD in the mix as well, it doesn't really matter for purposes of rating because the VA is only going to assign one rating no matter how many mental health diagnoses you may have or have had over the period of time that you've been seeking treatment for these conditions. The one distinction, however, is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. The VA wants to identify a stressor event, which is the event that probably triggered the PTSD, in order to grant you service connection for that condition. And that stressor event can be anything from service in combat and fear of hostile activity, to personal assault, to witnessing something traumatic. So it can be a couple different things, but it requires its own separate form, the VA form 20-0971, I think that's it. I'll put a link to it in the description here. They want a form to discuss the stressor events, and they want to try to corroborate it as best we can. And that can be corroborated either with a deployment overseas, with history of that, or maybe markers in service. They want some sort of corroboration showing that a traumatic event occurred for that condition. Now, for a separate condition that's very, very close called other traumatic stressor related event, it's not PTSD, you don't actually need to identify a stressor event. It's kind of weird. But in any event, this isn't really something you as the veteran need to worry about too much. The thing you should really look at, though, is, are you okay? If something's not right, get help, get mental health treatment. Talking to a therapist, talking to a counselor, even if it's at a vet center in a more informal setting, that can really be helpful. I've talked about Operation Headstrong before, which I'll link again in the description to this video. Just talk to somebody and figure out what's the name for what's going on. And if you don't know, but you know there's something going on with you that is related to your service, it's okay to write on the claim, acquired mental health condition. And the VA can take a look into what's going on with your acquired mental health condition. Lots of things can cause mental health conditions, depression because of physical pain or injury. That might be service connected. So there are a lot of ways to get there. One of the things I want to talk to, though, about all this and why I say you can be kind of vague on the application itself is because of a case called Clemens v. Shinseki. It's from about 15 years ago. It's a really important case. I could get into the details of this case, but the bottom line is if a veteran claims PTSD on their claim, on their supplemental claim, on their initial claim, what have you, VA goes through records and doesn't find PTSD, but they do find depression or anxiety, the VA has to assess that as well, because it's presumed that the veteran is not a doctor who can self-diagnose. If you don't know what the diagnosis is that you got, it's okay to write that because the VA is the one responsible looking through the records, to look through the records and figure out what the condition is and if it's service-connected. Now, how do you prove you're service-connected? How do you prove your mental health claim is service-connected? One of the things I like to do are my before and after statements. I will have veterans come to me and say, hey, I can't get service-connected. It's been years and years and years. And maybe they don't have a deployment. Maybe something happened to them in service and it's just not clear. But they do have friends and family that they worked with, that they've known since they got out of the service. Sometimes parents, brothers, sisters, spouses, even ex-spouses have come forward to say, yeah, when Joe or Jane got back from the Army, they were a shell of their former self. They drank a lot, had a short fuse, and it's been like that ever since they got out of the military, but they were never like that beforehand. stuff like that. Statement of support a claim that talks about the history that the condition, whatever the mental health condition is, started in service. Now, I don't tell people to get too specific because a key to doing these statements of support a claim is that the witness has to be competent to testify. Unless your witness happens to be a medical professional, they probably can't diagnose you. I personally couldn't diagnose any of my friends with depression or anxiety, but I might know something's wrong with them because they have a short fuse, or they seem unmotivated to do anything, or they've put on a ton of weight because they're stress eating. I can talk about that stuff, but I can't give them a diagnosis. So my buddy came to me and said, Andy, I need a letter because you've seen me over the last 10 years. You can tell what's going on. Say, yeah, I can do that for you. Hey, when Jim came back from his mobilization, he was a shell of his former self, totally unmotivated to go out with us, angry, sad, things that I can observe just being the lawyer that I am with no real training in psychology. I hope this was helpful. I hope you learned a little bit about Clemens v. Shinseki. Again, didn't want to get into the details of that case, but bottom line is VA's got to take a big picture approach and look at all the mental health conditions that might be at play. And again, don't focus too much about the actual diagnosis. If you don't know it, if you haven't been going to it. But above all else, talk to somebody if you need it. Don't try to fix a temporary problem with a permanent solution, which is why I'm also putting the National Suicide Hotline number in the description of this video. Reach out to somebody. And for those of you that are doing okay, reach out to your battle buddies because they want to hear from you. Sometimes you can change a person's day by just saying, how are you doing? We need to do better with this. We've gotten better, but we have a long way to go. If you have been denied a VA disability claim and you want help appealing, give us a call and we'll see what we can do for you. Take care.